The silence of deep space was shattered by the blinding flash of an explosion. The Arcturus, humanity's last hope, groaned under the weight of the alien bombardment. Every deck rattled as debris rained down, the station's outer hull succumbing to the relentless fire from the Xythaari fleet. Captain Lira Valen, gripping the cold steel of the command console, held her breath. The Arcturus was a dying vessel, a ghost ship meant to be a rallying point for the remnants of humanity's military. But now, it was just a target, a glowing bullseye in the dark of space. "Damage report!" she barked, her voice cutting through the static. "Shields are down to 35%, Captain," came the strained voice of Lieutenant Braxton, the head of the station's engineering team. "The outer layers are compromised. We have seconds before the next wave hits." Lyra's jaw clenched, her eyes narrowing as the distant Xythaari warships loomed. They had the numbers. They had the firepower. But humanity still had something the Xythaari didn't: tenacity. "Initiate countermeasures," Lira ordered, her voice unwavering, though her mind raced. If they couldn't push back the Xythaari now, the station would be lost, and with it, the last chance for humanity to regroup. A single, booming blast from the alien fleet rocked the Arcturus to its core, sending Lira stumbling against the console. She gritted her teeth, catching herself. Her head snapped toward the tactical display. A wave of alien warships had broken through their defenses and were closing in. They were outnumbered 3-1, but Lira wasn't about to surrender. "Send the signal. All ships fire at will," she commanded, her fingers flying over the terminal. On the screen, a swarm of human fighters darted from the Arcturus, lances of energy cutting through the void as they locked onto the alien ships. But the Xythaari were no amateurs. They retaliated instantly, laser beams streaking across the station's defensive line. The battle was turning into a bloodbath. "Brace for impact!" yelled Braxton, just as another wave of explosions lit up the stars. The Arcturus shook violently, the station groaning in protest. The next moments were a blur. The chaos on the bridge was deafening, officers shouting orders, alarms blaring, and sparks crackling as systems began to overload. Lyra's focus remained sharp. She had no choice but to press forward, but in the back of her mind, one question loomed large: where was the backup? The voice of Lieutenant Alaric, the station's tactical officer, broke her concentration. "Captain, we have a problem," he said, his tone tight. "Speak," she snapped, her eyes still scanning the chaotic displays. "We've lost contact with all fleet channels. I can't reach any of our ships in the battle zone." Alaric paused, his face pale. "There's no response from the ground forces either, Captain. It's as if they've gone dark." Lyra's pulse quickened. "That's impossible," she muttered under her breath. The fleet had a direct link to the Arcturus. It was supposed to be foolproof. "Captain," Braxton said, his voice cutting through the tension, "I'm seeing irregularities in the power grid. Internal sabotage, maybe? The lower decks have gone offline." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. "Sabotage?" she repeated. Her gut twisted. She'd suspected something, but this was worse than she had imagined. "Captain?" Alaric shouted, urgency in his voice. "You need to see this." Lira turned, crossing the command deck in 3 swift strides. The tactical officer's screen flickered, displaying an image, a black hooded figure moving through the station's corridors, hidden in the shadows. The figure's features were obscured by a cloak of dark energy, but the unmistakable glint of human-made technology gleamed from beneath the fabric. It was an infiltrator. "No!" Lyra's words caught in her throat. She couldn't believe it. Her mind raced. The only people with access to the station's sensitive areas were supposed to be loyal officers. But this figure wasn't a soldier. It was a traitor. "It's them," Lira whispered, her voice barely audible. "The Undone." The Undone were a rogue faction, mercenaries who had infiltrated the Resistance and sold humanity's secrets to the highest bidder. But what were they doing here? And why now? "We have to stop them," she said, her tone like ice. "Should we lock down the station?" Alaric asked. "No," Lira replied quickly, her mind already formulating a plan. I'll deal with this. We can't afford another complication right now. She turned to Braxton. Can you keep the station in the fight for another 5 minutes? Braxton looked at her with determination. I'll do what I can. You focus on the traitors. Lira nodded. Her eyes hardened. Get to it. The sound of explosions and the rumble of battle grew louder as she made her way toward the lower decks. She didn't have time to wait for reinforcements. The Undone had to be stopped, whatever it took. As she descended into the bowels of the Arcturus, Lyra's mind churned. Betrayal was a knife to the back, and the Undone had struck at the heart of humanity's last defense. But there was no time for doubt, no time for second-guessing. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and Lira was done waiting. She wasn't about to let some traitor or alien force dictate the future. With every step, the weight of the situation pressed down on her, but there was something else too, a spark of rage. A fire that hadn't been there before. Her brother's death had turned her into a machine, driven by cold logic. But this was personal. She would find whoever had sold them out and make them regret it. This war was far from over. As she reached the lower deck, the air turned colder, and the shadows deepened. The only sounds were her boots echoing off the metal floors and the distant hum of the station's failing systems. The traitor was close. Her hand gripped the hilt of her sidearm, and she moved silently through the darkened corridors. She could almost feel the traitor's presence, like a predator in the night, just beyond her reach. Show yourself, she muttered, voice low. A faint movement caught her eye, and she whirled around just as a figure lunged from the shadows, a knife gleaming in the dim light. Lira sidestepped, her combat instincts kicking in as she drew her sidearm and fired in one smooth motion. The figure collapsed to the ground with a thud. Lira knelt beside the fallen body, her breath steady but her heart racing. She pulled back the hood. Her eyes widened. The traitor's face wasn't unfamiliar. It was someone from her own crew. Someone she had trusted. Jaren, she whispered. Her brother's body lay before her, a tool of the enemy. The news of Jaren's betrayal spread like wildfire through the Arcturus. Lira was no longer just fighting the Xythaari, she was fighting her own people. The discovery had shattered something in her. Her brother, the one person who had always been her anchor, was now a ghost, a traitor. She stood over his body in the darkened hall of the lower decks, the reality of it settling in like a weight she could hardly carry. Captain! A voice interrupted her thoughts, and she turned to see Lieutenant Alaric standing in the doorway, his face drawn. We have a situation. Lira took one last look at her brother's body before wiping the blood from her hands and stepping away. What is it? The fleet's gone dark. I've been trying to reach them for the last half hour, but they're not responding. Not even a single distress signal. Lyra's heart skipped. What do you mean gone dark? No distress calls, no signals of any kind? Exactly, Alaric replied, eyes wide with unease. And the Arcturus is being targeted by a new fleet formation, something we've never seen before. It's a trap, Captain. The Xythaari are evolving. They're anticipating our moves. Lyra's pulse quickened. If their own fleet was compromised, they were truly alone. The Xythaari had found a way to block their communications, severing their lifeline to humanity's last remaining forces. The Resistance had just become an isolated, defenseless pocket in the dark expanse of space. Whoever is behind this has the knowledge of our tactics, she muttered, the weight of the realization dawning on her. We're playing their game now. Alaric's eyes hardened. What do we do, Captain? Lira took a deep breath, her mind racing. Prepare for a full-scale offensive. We break through or we die trying. Have all available fighters ready in 5 minutes. I want the fleet of ships we still control positioned for a counterattack. We'll force them to rethink their strategy. Understood, Alaric replied, but there was a clear unease in his voice. But without communication, how can we ensure the fleet responds properly? Lyra's jaw tightened. We don't need to ensure anything. We make them respond. We hit them hard enough that they'll have no choice but to respond. The sound of the Arcturus shuddering as enemy fire struck its shields was a constant undercurrent now. Every command issued by Lira felt like a calculated gamble. Her mind was sharp, but even she couldn't calculate the depth of the treachery they faced. Her brother's involvement in this was a bitter blow, but she couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now. She sat in the command chair, watching the chaos unfold on the holoscreen. The enemy fleet was vast, its ships swarming around the station like a deadly swarm of insects. The Xythaari had outflanked them from every angle, their relentless assault leaving the Arcturus no room to maneuver. A soft chime broke the silence. Lyra's eyes flicked to the communications terminal. Alaric's voice came through, barely audible over the static. "Captain, we've got an incoming transmission. Unknown frequency." Lira straightened. "Patch it through. Let's hear it." The crackling transmission cleared momentarily. A voice, low, cold, and unmistakably alien, cut through the static. "Humanity's time has passed, Captain Valen. We offered peace. You chose war. Now you will face extinction." It was Xythaari, the supreme overlord of the Xythaari. His voice held the unmistakable confidence of a predator who had already claimed victory in its mind. "You can't win this." Lira spat, her voice steady despite the anger boiling inside her. "Humanity doesn't die so easily." There was a pause, and then the alien overlord chuckled. "Your defiance is commendable, Captain. But it is pointless. You are nothing but a dying flame. I will extinguish it myself." Lira clenched her fists. The arrogance, the cruelty, it made her blood boil. The Xythaari had already decided the end of humanity. But they didn't understand what they were dealing with. Humanity wasn't just about numbers or strength, it was about resilience. It was about refusing to die. "We'll see whose flame burns brightest, Xythaari," she shot back, ending the transmission. "Prepare for a counterstrike. Focus on disabling their flagship. If we can take down their command ship, the fleet might fall apart." The tension on the bridge was palpable as Lira and her crew braced for the oncoming attack. Every moment felt like an eternity. Outside, the Xythaari fleet continued its unrelenting approach, their weapons primed, their deadly ships closing in. "Captain!" Alaric's voice interrupted her thoughts again. "There's more. Our internal systems are still compromised. The sabotage is deeper than we thought. Someone's been working against us from the inside, even before the Xythaari attack began." "Damn it," Lira muttered, her face pale with realization. The sabotage, the undone, it was all part of the Xythaari's plan. The traitor she'd discovered wasn't just a fluke. This had been orchestrated from the start. Her mind flashed to the hidden data she'd found in Jaren's personal files. The encrypted messages. The connections to the Xythaari. It wasn't just betrayal, it was infiltration. "How bad is it?" Lira asked, the sharpness of her voice cutting through the tension. "We have no way to know," Alaric admitted. "We're going in blind." Lyra's gaze hardened. "Then we make sure the Xythaari pay the price for underestimating us." The first salvo of enemy fire was upon them before they could blink. The station lurched violently, sending sparks and shattered metal flying through the air. The Arcturus' hull creaked, groaning under the weight of the bombardment. The crew scrambled to maintain their positions as Lira issued command after command, her mind locked in battle mode. "Return fire!" she shouted. "Lock onto their engines. We need to cripple them before they can launch another wave." The Arcturus fired back, its remaining weaponry lashing out at the Xythaari ships. The enemy fleet was relentless, but their own response was slow, disjointed. Lira could see the cracks forming. They weren't expecting this kind of resistance. "Direct hit on their flagship's starboard side," Alaric called out. "We've got their engines offline, but they're still firing." Lira grinned, her teeth flashing. "Good. Keep it up. They're not going anywhere. Not yet." She turned to face her crew, their faces worn but determined. "This is it," she said. "The final push. We break them or we die trying." But as the Arcturus' weapons continued to fire, something shifted in Lira. The mission, the plan, it was all starting to unravel. She had always been the one to command the battlefield with precision, to think several steps ahead. But now, it wasn't just about strategy anymore. It was personal. Her brother's death had ignited something in her, a fury that she had never allowed to surface. And the Xythaari were about to learn what it meant to push humanity into a corner. "All ships, full throttle!" Lira ordered. "We're breaking through." She wouldn't just survive. She would win. The Arcturus shuddered violently as the final wave of enemy fire tore through the station's remaining shields. Sparks rained down from overhead, igniting the air with a brutal hiss of metal and plasma. Captain Lira Valen stood at the helm, her hands clenched tightly around the console. Her breath was shallow, each impact against the station's hull driving the reality of their situation deeper into her gut. "We've lost 60% of our fighter wing," Alaric reported, his voice strained with disbelief. "The enemy's reinforcing their flanks. It's only a matter of time before we're overrun." Lira didn't answer immediately. She was studying the tactical display, her mind calculating and recalculating their dwindling options. The Xythaari had them cornered. Every angle was covered by their vast, overwhelming fleet. And then, in the midst of the chaos, a small line on her screen caught her attention. "Captain," Alaric said, his eyes fixed on the display. "Something's wrong. The Xythaari flagship, it's not firing back." Lyra's pulse quickened. "What do you mean? They're just sitting there?" Alaric nodded, looking back at her. "Exactly. They've powered down their weapons. They're waiting." Lira narrowed her eyes. This wasn't a simple lull in the battle. The enemy was preparing something far worse than just overwhelming force. She felt it in her bones. A trap was closing in. She wasn't about to sit idle while Xythaari's forces prepared to finish them off. "Prepare the Arcturus for a full assault," she commanded, her voice unwavering. "Target the flagship. If we're going to die, we're taking their command ship with us." The station's remaining fighter craft streaked through space, evading the fire of Xythaari warships, closing the gap between them and the enemy's flagship. Lyra's crew worked with practiced precision, but the weight of their situation hung in the air like a choking fog. Lyra's mind raced as she stared at the communications panel. Every part of her wanted to launch the final assault immediately. Yet something nagged at her. A feeling that this wasn't just the end of a battle, it was the culmination of a much darker plan that Xythaari had been orchestrating all along. "Captain, something's happening with the flagship," Braxton, the station's chief engineer, shouted from his post. "It's charging some kind of weapon. It's not like anything we've seen before. A direct hit from that could wipe us off the map." Lira turned to him, the weight of the situation pressing against her chest. "How long do we have?" "Minutes," Braxton responded quickly, tapping away at his console. "Maybe less." The sound of a distant, low hum filled the bridge as the Arcturus buckled again under heavy fire. The enemy flagship had completed its weapon charging sequence. The air around them seemed to crackle with energy as the ominous glow of the weapon's core expanded into the night. Lyra's heart rate increased as she instinctively took the helm. "Initiate evasive maneuvers. Get us close enough to fire on their reactors." The crew scrambled into action. The Arcturus lurched as it broke through the barrage, streaking toward the flagship with the weight of desperation propelling it forward. For a brief, terrifying moment, Lira thought they wouldn't make it. But the sheer will of her crew and the burning need for survival pushed them ahead. "We're in range!" Alaric shouted, his hands dancing across the control panel. "All weapons, open fire!" The Arcturus unleashed everything it had left, the station's remaining plasma cannons and railguns flaring to life. Streams of energy and fire collided with the flagship's hull, punching deep into its dark metallic skin. But the flagship's shield held, the alien technology absorbing the hits with almost no visible damage. "Shields are still holding," Alaric said, voice grim. "This is going to take more than we've got." Lyra's gaze shifted from the tactical screen to the distant glow of the flagship's weapon. Just as it began to power up again, the pulse of its impending shot making the air around them vibrate with malevolent energy. In that moment, Lyra's eyes narrowed. She saw the trajectory of the weapon, saw the exact moment when the flagship would fire its world-destroying shot. Time slowed. This was the moment. The tipping point. The one they couldn't afford to miss. "Activate the pulse cannon!" she barked. A massive energy burst shot from the Arcturus, the station's last-ditch weapon. The pulse cannon flared to life with a deafening hum, discharging everything they had in a single beam of raw, untamed force. The attack slammed into the flagship's shield, sending ripples of energy across the alien craft's surface. The flagship staggered, its power grid flickering. Lyra's hand shot out to the control panel as the Arcturus swung into position. "All remaining fighters, engage!" she yelled. The human fighters dove into the fray, their weapons piercing the Xythaari's defenses. The enemy flagship, now reeling from the barrage, was vulnerable. But as the battle reached its peak, an unmistakable voice boomed across the comms system. "Xythaari. You fight well, human. But it is useless. You cannot win." Lyra's eyes flashed with fury as she clenched her fists around the console. "Not yet," she muttered. "Not while we still breathe." Another round of fire from the Arcturus slammed into the Xythaari flagship. The alien vessel shook violently, and for the first time, cracks appeared in its outer shields. Then, the unthinkable happened. The flagship's weapons sputtered, and then they died. The glow of the massive weapon flickered out. Lyra's mouth went dry as she watched the flagship's core destabilize. The pulse cannon had weakened its defenses, and the explosion from its own weapon core had caused a chain reaction. The Xythaari flagship began to break apart. "Captain!" Alaric shouted, his voice laced with disbelief. "They're retreating. The fleet is pulling back." Lyra's heart hammered in her chest. The impossible was happening. The tide was turning. The Xythaari, seemingly unbeatable just hours ago, were faltering. But even in victory, she knew it wasn't over. Xythaari had only been one part of the machine. There were more, always more. The truth about humanity's survival, about the real stakes of this war, was just beginning to unravel. The betrayal of her brother, the sabotage within their own ranks, it all pointed to something even darker than what they had already faced. "Hold position," Lyra ordered, still scanning the battle. "We need to regroup and prepare for the next strike. This isn't over." "Not yet." As the Arcturus remained steady, hovering in the wreckage of the shattered flagship, Lyra's mind raced. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The fight was changing, and soon they would face enemies they could not yet understand. But for now, in this moment, humanity had won a victory that Xythaari could never have predicted. And for the first time in what felt like years, Lyra allowed herself a single breath. The war was still on, but they had just bought themselves the chance to win it. The aftermath of the battle was a surreal silence. The Arcturus, battered and bruised, drifted in the void, surrounded by the wreckage of the Xythaari flagship and the scattered remains of their fleet. It should have been a moment of triumph. Humanity had won, had driven back the seemingly invincible enemy. But the silence on the bridge felt suffocating, a quiet before the inevitable storm. Lyra stood at the helm, staring at the flickering tactical screen, her mind racing. The Xythaari fleet had retreated, but the victory felt hollow. The space around them was a graveyard of both human and alien ships. The shattered flagship's remains were floating in a disjointed cloud of debris, a grim reminder of the carnage that had unfolded. "Captain!" Alaric's voice cut through the silence, his tone heavy with weariness. "We've managed to get some of our comms back online. The resistance on Earth is still intact. But—" he hesitated, looking over his shoulder at her, as if unsure how to proceed. "But we've received a transmission from the remnants of the Xythaari fleet. It's not what we expected." Lyra turned toward him, the weight of exhaustion in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" "An encrypted message," Alaric continued. "From Xythaari. He's not just threatening to return for vengeance. He's telling us something else, something about the future of humanity." Lyra's blood ran cold. What does he want us to know? Alaric took a deep breath and activated the transmission. The screen flickered before the image of Xythaari materialized, his face twisted in an unreadable expression. His voice, cold as ever, reverberated through the speakers. You think this battle has been won, human? Xythaari's words were venomous, each syllable dripping with contempt. You may have destroyed my flagship, but you have no idea what you've unleashed. The Xythaari Empire was never meant to be the true enemy. The real threat is already here. Lira felt her stomach tighten. Her hands clenched into fists. What is he talking about? She whispered under her breath. Xythaari's lips curled into a thin smile, like a predator savoring the hunt. The weapon you stumbled upon, the one that allowed you to defeat me, was never yours to wield. It was designed for you, for the human race. It was meant to trigger the next stage of your evolution, to push humanity toward a new destiny. The Xythaari have been watching your kind for centuries, and now the next phase begins. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. The weapon. Jaren's research. She murmured, her mind flickering to the encrypted files she had discovered in her brother's belongings. He wasn't just a victim. He was part of this plan. Xythaari's voice continued, cold and clinical. Humanity was never meant to remain as it is. We gave you the catalyst. And now, you will either join us in the next phase, or die along with the rest of your kind. It is inevitable. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the bridge in dead silence. For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of Xythaari's words hung heavily in the air. Lyra's mind was reeling. The weapon they had used to defeat the Xythaari was never meant to be a defense. It was a trigger. A trigger for something far worse than the invasion they had just stopped. A new enemy. A new danger. She turned slowly to face Alaric, the urgency in her eyes matching the storm that raged within her. Do you have any idea what he means by the next phase? Alaric shook his head, his face grim. No, but I think Jaren did. He was researching something tied to the Xythaari's genetic manipulation. It was supposed to be a last-ditch effort to enhance humanity's survival. But if Xythaari's telling the truth, we've opened a door we can't close. Lira swallowed hard, the truth hitting her like a punch to the gut. She'd thought they were fighting for humanity's survival. But this wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a struggle against an evolution they hadn't asked for. And now, it had begun. The lights on the bridge flickered as a deep rumbling shook the station. Braxton's voice, frantic and sharp, filled the silence. Captain? You need to see this. We've detected an anomaly, one that wasn't here before. It's massive. Lira turned toward him, her pulse racing. Where? What's happening? It's coming from Earth, Braxton replied. Something is emerging from the planet's core. A signal, too strong to ignore. Lira felt the weight of the words settle over her like a heavy fog. Xythaari warned us. Captain, Alaric said, urgency in his voice. We need to act fast. We don't know what we're dealing with here, but if this is what we think it is, we're talking about something that could end humanity. For good. Lyra's eyes hardened as she took a step forward. Then we don't wait. We go to Earth. We stop whatever this is before it can take root. The Arcturus turned slowly, its engines igniting with a hum that felt almost too quiet for the monumental task ahead. As the ship made its way toward Earth, Lira stood at the helm, her mind racing. The weight of the situation was unbearable. They had just beaten one force, an invader bent on the destruction of humanity. But what if the real threat wasn't an alien empire? What if humanity's greatest enemy was its own evolution, something it had never chosen? Something beyond even their understanding. She clenched her jaw, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon of Earth, the blue planet now shrouded in shadows. We're not giving up, she whispered to herself, the words a promise. Alaric joined her at the helm, looking out the viewport at Earth. No matter what's coming, Captain, we'll fight it. We've already proven they underestimated us. Lira nodded, her resolve steeling. This is it. The real war. But we're not backing down. As the Arcturus descended toward Earth, a new chapter in humanity's struggle was about to begin. The Xythaari had been only the beginning. What awaited them now was the true test, one that would determine not just the survival of the human race, but its very future. They were no longer fighting to defend humanity. Now, they were fighting to define it. The Arcturus entered Earth's atmosphere, and as the ship broke through the clouds, Lira couldn't shake the feeling that the war had only just begun. What lay below them, hidden beneath the surface, would be humanity's greatest challenge. And this time, there would be no escape.